Okay, they told me that I need to use a microphone because they're recording this presentation, so I really don't feel like I need it, but I've got it anyway. So I'm going to stick pretty closely to the script just because I want to respect your time and get you out of here. Obviously, the bad news is, since we're starting late, you're already going to be getting out of here a little later than you had anticipated. Maybe they'll account for that and start the general session a little later. I don't know. I can't make any promises because I have absolutely zero power and influence within the organization itself. Any of you ever feel that way? All right, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. Like I said, I'm going to stick pretty closely to the script. My name is David Edwards. I'm the president and COO of a national nonprofit organization called Humanizing the Badge. About 2 years ago, we began to do some research on the topic of suicide in law enforcement, and then we instituted what we call our Call for Backup program, which encourages officers to be the backup for one another when they need it, and to call for backup for themselves when they happen to be struggling with the stresses of the job or with life in general. Following the line of duty death of my youngest son in 2010 in Taylor, Michigan, I began training as a police chaplain. I'm now the lead chaplain in the department where my son served, as well as a reserve officer with that department now. And I've focused my efforts pretty heavily on the support of law enforcement officers and their family members as they attempt to cope with the stresses of the job. And so I talk to officers and family members across the country pretty much on a daily basis and let them know that there are resources available for them, and that when the path they are walking becomes really dark, that they don't have to walk that path alone. And so we have a mental health and peer support unit within Humanizing the Badge that has peer support specialists spread across the country. And so we try to match people up with appropriate personnel to provide that support for them, and obviously referrals as necessary. So by way of background, it's no secret that officer safety, including officer mental wellness, is a topic that has been on the priority list for some time. Humanizing the Badge conducted some research beginning in 2016 and then into 2017 and continued on into 2018. So we've done quite a bit of ongoing research into this topic. But back in 2016, we used what we found was a system of evaluating stress within law enforcement. A couple of different questionnaires just called simply the police stress questionnaires. One is called the operational stress questionnaire. Oh, hello. And it deals with the tasks associated with performing the duties of law enforcement. And then the other is called the organizational stress questionnaire, which deals with the political, bureaucratic, administrative aspects of police work. This is going to come as a complete shock to you, but more people report higher perceived stress levels on the organizational stress questionnaire than they do on the operational stress questionnaire. And that's not just anecdotal now. We have actual research that backs that up. So stress runs moderately high among the officers that participated in that study with us. And then in 2014, the International Association of Chiefs of Police released a paper called Breaking the Silence. They had a symposium on officer safety and mental wellness, and they released this paper that focused on some recommendations that they were making to departments across the country. And I'm just going to read those recommendations to you very quickly. 1, raise awareness regarding suicide and mental health issues in law enforcement and move toward a culture of support and understanding. Identify and evaluate resources, best practices, and training related to suicide prevention, intervention, and response programs. And then finally, create a strategic plan to guide police chiefs in taking proactive measures to mitigate the risk of suicide and openly address officer mental health as a core element of officer safety. And then in 2018, the Law Enforcement Mental Health and Wellness Act was signed into law, which makes federal grants available to initiate peer mentoring pilot programs to develop resources for mental health providers based on some specific mental health challenges that are faced by law enforcement officers, and to study the effectiveness of crisis hotlines and annual mental health checks and those sorts of things. So my hope today is to get you to think about whether departments and agencies across the country are in fact supporting their personnel the way that these recommendations were trying to lead them, and to suggest to you that based on our recent research, departments and agencies probably aren't doing that as best as they could. So my humble opinion is that we probably aren't doing enough. On-the-job stress is literally killing our officers. Law enforcement is consistently rated as one of the most stressful jobs. Every year, Forbes magazine puts out a list of most stressful occupations. Law enforcement always makes the top 5. One year it was active duty military, followed by firefighter, followed by airline pilot, then police officer. Rounding out the top 5 that year, wedding planner. Never would have thought of wedding planners as first responders, but gosh, who knows? Anyway, so I want to talk to you about the stress on our police officers, specifically about the topic of suicide among our police officers. And former police officers, for that matter. The number of police officers completing suicide is a difficult number to determine for a variety of reasons, primarily because there's no centralized reporting system to actually track law enforcement suicides as there are with duty injuries or duty-related deaths. So a lot of times we just don't know the accurate number. The numbers that we do know are staggering in that we've lost more police officers. In fact, in emergency services, we lose more firefighters every year to suicide than we lose in the line of duty. Corrections officers are at a 39% greater risk for suicide than the general population. Suicidal thinking among medics is 10 times greater than the general population. Dispatchers have vicarious traumatization and secondary traumatic stress, so that increases their risks as well. The military population notwithstanding, we have serious problems in law enforcement with our mental wellness initiatives that, if implemented properly, could prevent what I often call the other line of duty death, which is certainly and obviously not considered a line of duty death, but we lose a dozen or more officers every month to suicide. Colonel Dave Grossman, as recently as this past Sunday, I heard him say it again, that the real number is probably somewhere between 200 and 450 officers die by suicide on an annual basis. Back in April of 2017, Humanizing the Badge did some specific research on why police officers would consider suicide. We wanted to know why officers don't reach out for help when they know they need it. We wanted to know how many of them would consider suicide as an option under a number of different conditions, gather information on whether they had ever personally known an officer or former officer who had died by suicide, get some information on whether they were personally aware of another department or agency in their area that had lost an officer or former officer to suicide. And so we conducted this research, and of course, before I get into the specifics of the research, I teach research methods in the social work department of a university in Michigan, so I have to tell you some of the sort of technical information about the research study that we did. These are the kind of questions that we were concerned about. It was a mixed method study, which means there were both quantitative and qualitative elements to the research that we did. It was a cross-sectional survey design, which means it was meant to gather information at a single point in time, which means, 2 years later, the percentages may have changed somewhat. But based on the size of the sample that we had, 3,892 respondents, the likelihood that those numbers have changed significantly in the last couple of years is relatively small. This survey has a margin of error of less than 2.5%. So what did we learn from the survey that we conducted? First, what we found was that approximately 41% of officers or former officers responding said that they would consider suicide as an option under a variety of different conditions. Now, these conditions include, and I'm just going to pop these 9 things up on the screen for you so that you can take a look at those. Those conditions under which they said, yes, if this were true for me, I would consider suicide as an option. And of course, you see that some of those things are not necessarily even law enforcement related. Some have to do with struggles and stresses that people outside law enforcement would experience as well. But 41% said, yes, I would consider suicide as an option. Now, this research was really based off of research that has been done a little over 20 years ago, where the question was framed a little differently. The question that was asked then, and this included 500 officers from 9 different metropolitan departments. The question that was asked then was, if you were to ever consider suicide as an option, what would the reason be? And that's where this list came from. So we framed the question differently in that we said, here's this list. Given this list, is there something on here that you would say, yep, that would cause me to consider suicide as an option? Again, 41% said yes to at least one, and some of them more than one of these things. The next thing we learned is that 43% of those responding said that they have personally known an officer or former officer who has died by suicide. Personally known. Now, what are the odds that you would personally know someone that has died by suicide in law enforcement? If you are on social media at all, many of you may be familiar with a Facebook group out there, a page called Survive the Streets, a page for cops. That page was started by a gentleman by the name of Chris Fisher, who is now one of our board members at Humanizing the Badge. And between November of 2016 and October of 2017, Chris lost 4 personal friends in law enforcement to suicide. 2 of them were fellow administrators on that Facebook page called Survive the Streets, a page for cops. One of them was the first person to give him a job in law enforcement in the state of Alabama, the sheriff that he worked for there. Walked into his office one day, pulled out his service weapon, and took his own life in his office. So again, the odds are that you will, if you don't already, know someone in your profession who has decided to take his or her own life. Further, our research shows that 78% of those responding said that they are personally aware of another department or agency that has lost an officer or former officer to suicide. I know the men and women in this room hear about those suicides in your area when they happen. I know that you're probably plagued by the same questions that most people would be plagued with, like, what did I miss? Why didn't I see that coming? What could we have done to keep this from happening? And, you know, while many individuals considering suicide work very hard to keep those thoughts to themselves and do their very best not to give any indication that that's where they're headed, when we see changes in people, we talk about how change creates stress. Stress causes change. So when we begin to see changes in people, that literally begs us to ask the question, are you okay? We really have to get comfortable with the idea of just looking our colleagues in the eye and saying, I'm concerned about you, are you okay? Now, in all likelihood, the first response you're going to hear is probably one of the most often told lies in law enforcement, which is, I'm good. I mean, that's what they typically say, right? Oh, I'm good. And you have to be courageous enough to say, you don't look like you're good. We need to talk. I mean, that's really what it takes. When you begin to see change in people, there are warning signs. Often we don't actually recognize them as warning signs, but if you've got people who are talking a lot about death and dying or writing a lot about death and dying, they're at risk. If they're securing the means. Now, as a little side note, firearms are used in only about 5 to 6% of suicide attempts. So taking people's guns away is not going to solve the problem. But because firearms are about 95% effective, they are responsible for between 50 and 55% of all suicide deaths. Every law enforcement officer has access to the most lethal means in existence. Anybody that's recently been diagnosed with a mental illness, predominantly mood disorders, research has shown us that 90% of people completing suicide have a diagnosable mental illness at the time of their death. How about substance abuse or dependence? NYPD did some research looking back at suicides that they had had in their own department, looking for some common threads. One of the things that they found is that 95% of those officers completing suicide had alcohol in their system at the time of their death. So there is that link between alcohol use and depression and suicidal thinking, and then when that doesn't fix it, they just use more, and it still doesn't fix it, so they use more, and then they figure out, I can't fix this, and so they decide to take the other way out. Previous suicide attempts, obviously that's a big warning sign. Family history of mental illness, family history of suicide. We had an active officer in our department. Today is May 22nd. May 23rd of 2013, we had an active officer in our department die by suicide. He had recently been placed on antidepressant medication, had a family history of bipolar disorder. His one uncle and his own dad had died by suicide. So he kind of hit the trifecta of some of these major warning signs, and nobody thought to ask him if he was doing okay. Nobody in the department. And that's been 6 years, and that's still a legacy that our department is not going to live down. People who have become withdrawn, isolated, changes in eating habits, changing in sleeping habits, neglecting self-care, talking about feeling hopeless. In fact, if you ever take the law enforcement perspectives class, we talk about the sort of the top three, the big three, helplessness, hopelessness, and worthlessness. And you can see sometimes people over the course of a career feeling like they're not making a difference anymore, feeling like what they're doing isn't getting the results that they intended. It's sort of defying the purpose for which they entered the profession, and if they're not going to get that satisfaction of having that purpose completed, then what's the use in going on living? So it's easy to wonder why officers don't reach out for help when they know they need it. We asked this question, what else do we need to know about why people don't actually ask for help when they need it? We had about 900 people responded to that open-ended question. About 17% of them used the word stigma in one form or another. Now, sometimes that stigma comes from the administration, sometimes it comes from the municipality, sometimes there are state laws involved, like there are in Illinois, for example. So sometimes there's that bureaucratic, political kind of stigma associated with it, but a lot of times the stigma comes from fellow officers who begin to see that individual as defective, who now begin to shun that individual and don't want to associate, have conversations with that person, or don't want to have that individual back them up on a call, or don't want to back them up on a call. So that stigma is something that runs, depending on how you want to perceive it, top down or bottom up, either way. That stigma often runs entirely through the department. And then the other thing that people said, and this was about 13 to 14% of the people that responded, basically described how their departments just don't help them, and that they wouldn't perceive that there was any support coming from the department. I want to share with you some of the quotes that came from the research. I'll comment on them. I'm not going to read the quotes word for word to you because they're in your slides. But the first quote comes from an officer that simply believes that officers are left to their own devices. You got a problem? You figure it out. I started out back in the day as a dispatcher in a fairly large city in central Illinois. And the chief I worked for then was, the suck-it-up buttercup kind of guy. And there's still a lot of that, because who's training the guy coming up after him? Well, he's training him. So, that legacy of suck-it-up buttercup still keeps going. You figure it out. If you can't handle it, then you just got to quit. So if you're going to stay, you got to figure it out. Another one talks about the need to change the culture that makes seeking mental health treatment taboo. Let's embrace a culture that makes it okay to reach out for some help. Another one admits to having constant thoughts of suicide. He said, my family, my wife and kids, that's the only reason I'm still here, because I've determined that I'm not going to do that to them. But he said, I've got those thoughts running through my head all the time. And another one talks about how some officers seem to be more resilient than others, but obviously they're still aware of the problem of suicide among their ranks. You look at this quote, when government officials believe that officers who seek mental health treatment are automatically unfit for duty, it becomes difficult to imagine how supportive agencies in those jurisdictions would possibly be. And of course, sometimes, as I said, the stigma doesn't come from the administration or some government bureaucracy, but from fellow officers themselves. There are others who say, there are those laws in place, those policies and procedures in place that say if I'm seeking mental health treatment, I'm going to lose my badge, I'm going to lose my credentials, I'm going to lose my gun, all of those things. And of course, that would be like taking the hammer away from a carpenter. You take the tools of the job away from somebody, that takes away part of their purpose, that takes away part of their identity. I want to give you a very real, personal example of how that works. I was teaching our 4-hour suicide awareness and prevention class on April 5th, so just about 6 weeks ago. There was a deputy sheriff in attendance, along with his wife, who works full-time as a nurse, but she also works part-time for an ambulance company. So they were both in the class. He had a breakdown when they got home. He confessed to his wife that hearing what we talked about in that class made him realize that he had been suppressing some things for a while, and that he was struggling with thoughts of suicide. And so he admitted that he needed to get some help, and so he went to talk to his sheriff, who said, hey, we're on your side. We're going to support you. Get the help you need. 3 weeks later, he received a letter in the mail saying that he was being terminated because he had sought mental health treatment. So we wonder why officers don't reach out for help when they need it. So what should we be doing then? What can we do to make a difference? I grew up in Motown. I grew up listening to Motown music. I can still remember the Jackson 5 singing ABC. And I'm thinking, can it be that simple? I didn't say easy, but can it be that simple? Is there an ABC that can sort of guide what we should be doing? And if there is, I would say A is just address the issue. Suicide among first responders is the issue that we are, quote unquote, not supposed to talk about. But until we address the fact that we lose more personnel to suicide every year than we lose in the line of duty, and that 4 out of 10 of our officers on any given day are considering suicide, until we address that issue, we're not going to be making any progress. B, build trust. Trust comes from relationships. There's no stronger relationship than that which exists between peers. People want to talk to people who get it. We have people, officers and family members contacting us on a regular basis looking for help. They'll pour out their hearts, they'll tell us their story, and they will often say something like this: do you have somebody like me I can talk to? They want to know that whoever they're opening up their heart and mind to is someone who gets it, someone who can show genuine empathy and support for what they are going through. We've done some additional research that tells us 4 to 1, here's what personnel prefer. Given the choice between an annual visit with a mental health professional hired by the department that's made mandatory by the department, or voluntary participation in an effective peer-to-peer support program, 4 to 1, they tell us they would prefer to have an effective peer-to-peer support program that they could participate in. And as we know in the field of critical incident stress management, that's often enough to help people get through moments of crisis that they're happening. And then we just simply need to change the culture. That number one reason why officers don't reach out for help, that stigma, that's associated with the search for mental wellness. Departments need to stop punishing officers who admit they need help. The culture of shame because of some perceived weakness has to change. This is the motivation behind our call for backup suicide awareness and prevention campaign that we have. We're well on our way to reaching our goal of teaching this class in at least one location in every state within the first 5 years. We're about a year and a half into it. I think by the time this year is over, I will have been in 26 or 27 states. So we're ahead of pace. I can still fit your department in somewhere in the schedule. We're trying our best to get the message out to the extent that all we ask for is some help with travel expenses. The class itself is free. I'm going to be in Allen, Texas next month. They graciously have already compensated the organization to pay for the travel expenses, and I'm going to be down there doing 6 sessions of that 4-hour class over 3 days because they have had such a response for it that they had to add additional sessions and change the venue to accommodate larger numbers of people. So there is more of a hunger out there for this than people often realize. I want to share a video with you real quick. I think we're doing okay based on the time that we actually got started. If you will indulge me for a couple more minutes, and I want to show you this video that was it's a song that was performed by a San Diego County Sheriff's deputy who is part of our Humanizing the Badge organization. His name is Eric Garcia. He does music under the stage name Forensic, all police-themed music. And literally about a month before we released this program that we were rolling out, he released this song called Saving a Hero.
When the day is done, hold me close. Promises are ours to keep.
how he needs that support to keep his roof from caving, holding tight on that 45 as a tear drops from his eye. Picturing his mom is all that's kept him alive, cause he's buried his friends and he's buried his thoughts. Suppress these demons inside until his stomach's in knots. I see you on your knees, so please let me give you hell. Pick you up, lift you up and put you on that top shelf. Trying to improve, but he keeps dealing with this feeling like he can't push up any harder. His head has hit the ceiling. He's seen so many hurt and so many in trouble, so who's to help him keep his world from turning to rubble? Time and time again he's witnessed summer sun on the pavement, yet the evil that he sees is on TV is entertainment, telling him to be strong through it all, but these thoughts he's still braving. So tell me again how a hero needs saving.
When the day is done,
When that day is done, yeah.
hold me close.
Hold me close, baby, yeah, never let me go.
Promises are ours to keep.
Promise to return home back to you.
All the clouds would disappear.
Blue skies on my horizon inside. Give a kiss to his boy and a kiss to his girl. Each day he walks away from these things in his world, expected to be the rock solid from bottom to top. He's so hard in the streets, but inside he feels so soft. He's dodged bullets and knives, stopped men from beating wives. But boom, someone tries to take his gun and now he took a life. And all you do is stare, spread rumors, he don't care. Replaying that moment, can't disown it with a gun to his hair. It ain't fair, he knew when he started he'd go so far. You had a long day at work, he failed at CPR. His motivation's gone, no more fire in his eyes. Went from peaceful nights to dreams of crime scenes and cries. He never could guess his friend would take two to the chest, but forget the pain, he pushes back like bring on the rest. As you're planning your weekend, he's planning out his headstone engraving. So go and tell me again how a hero needs saving.
When the day is done,
When that day is done, yeah.
hold me close.
Hold me close, baby, yeah, never let me go.
Promises are ours to keep.
Promise to return home back to you.
All the clouds would disappear.
Blue skies on my horizon inside.
Who can say where the road will go as the world goes round and round? Wipe away your tears, baby. I am home.
We've lost too many heroes to the war in their minds. We must do something better, we can't keep leaving them behind. Are you picturing death or is death picturing you? The struggle's real inside, so let me tell you what you'll do. Rise back up, get back up and tell us how you feel. You can't bottle it up any longer, show us that it's real. Like a bird set free, now you see how life can be so amazing. Nothing feels better than saving a hero that needed saving.
When the day is done, hold me close. Promises are ours to keep. All the clouds would disappear. When the day is done,
When that day is done, yeah.
hold me close.
Hold me close, baby, yeah, never let me go.
Promises are ours to keep.
Promise to return home back to you.
All the clouds would disappear.
Blue skies on my horizon inside.
I've got one more 1-minute video that I want to show you before we leave, but before we do that, any questions?
What was that artist's name again?
Eric Garcia, he goes by Forensic. If you go on YouTube and search Forensic Music, you'll get pretty much everything that he's ever released. Also, if you watch any funny cop videos online at all, he's part of the pair called Deputy Hookem and Deputy Bookem. He's Deputy Hookem. And his partner is also a San Diego County Sheriff's deputy. All right, any other questions? One last 1-minute video, and I promise we're done. I don't know if it works this way in the area where you're from, but where I'm from, there is a little bit of friendly rivalry between law enforcement and the fire service. So, friendly rivalry, yes. What did Grossman say Sunday? He said, dang firefighters, they sleep till they're hungry and eat till they're tired and repeat as necessary. But remember, I started out in the fire service too. And this quick video is, I think, illustrative of that rivalry a little bit. This is one of our co-founders of Humanizing the Badge, Mike, who goes by Mike the Cop on social media, and his friend Officer Daniels, whose last name isn't really Daniels, but he's one of our Humanizing the Badge board members. So I'll leave you with this video, and then I'll put up the slide that has the evaluation number on there for you.
I'm bored.
I know.
Want to go run some plates?
We did that yesterday.
You hungry?
We literally just ate.
You want to go pretend to be
Firefighters?
What I want, you got, and it might be hard to handle. But like a flame that burns a candle, the candle feeds the flame. And what I got, what are you guys doing?
That was fun.
Donuts?
Donuts.
All right, so follow Officer Daniels and Mike the Cop on social media. You have a slide that has my contact information on it. There is the number that you need to do the evaluation for the presentation. Thanks for your attention. I know we probably went a couple minutes beyond our time. I appreciate your indulgence. All right, God bless you all.